Okay, welcome. And I'll get the first slide up, I hope. And off we go. Okay, we did a brief introduction to Islam last week, and we did that because of the father of the Pashtuns, their George Washington, is believed, and I emphasize believed because it's a legend, to have gone to Mecca and met with Muhammad. And I kind of went, so let's go through Islam because it's really deep in Pashtun culture. And so I wanted to continue to go through a little bit more a detailed review of Islam, just because that's certainly one of the many motivations of the Taliban. But I'm working on a model that's trying to work in all the variables as to who's motivated to do what, and it's complicated. But for sure, we got to know the basics of Islam. There are two extremes of Islam, right? There's the Sufi wing with this wonderful quote, one of Rumi's many wonderful quotes. And I think we have a Sufi temple right here in Walnut Creek, Tina. And the other extreme we see now in Afghanistan. Is this motivation Islamic, or is it something else? I'm going to make a case that it's not purely Islamic. Of course. And let's just review the basic five. I'll let you just skim this real fast. I don't have to read it for you. And then with those five basically in mind, we'll dive deeper. This is, you have to believe there's no God but Allah. We saw last week how Muhammad took the pagan idols out of the Kaaba, and he left one, and that was a sky god named Allah, and Allah got a promotion. He's a monotheistic Muhammad, following the example of his allies in Medina, the Jews, and the Christians who had come in contact with as a camel driver on the way to Damascus. Prayer 5 times a day. These are the ideal times of the day. We're all familiar with the annual Ramadan fasting. Almsgiving, a major pillar to deal with poverty. That's a problem in all societies, including ours. And once in a lifetime trip. And here are the symbols. One finger held high in the air. That doesn't mean we're number one. It means Allah's the only one. The prayer, the tying, Mecca, and fasting. And so examples of this: begging on the street is not looked down on. It's part of the culture. A declaration of faith to the one God. Don't accept any idols. Also, we can read that in our own Bible. And Muhammad gave special privilege to the people of the book, the Jews and the Christians. And their Old Testament is very much part of Islamic faith. And as I think I've mentioned, that Jesus is mentioned more often than Muhammad in the Quran. When you travel in a Muslim country, you're always given directions to Mecca, because that's the direction you need to pray. If you can't find it on the desk, look up at the ceiling. And I'm Shigeko, I'm happy to report this is in Indianapolis, my hometown, and Shigeko has lived there for long periods of time, and at their new airport, they have a prayer room. How about that? I don't think in the Bay Area we have a prayer room at our airport. And then the Hajj to 5 days of submission. And the dates of it vary from year to year, but boy, oh boy, they come from all over. And of course, unfortunately, in this day and age, before COVID, this was the center of polio epidemics, for example. And I can imagine throughout history, it's always been a problem in the spread of communicable diseases. And it's not just inside, this is on the rooftop. The pact in humanity surely has the Guinness Book of Records, and outside as well. Unbelievable. And this is what this is Mecca from the helicopter, and this is the Kaaba down here. Imagine the support system for all those people that have to swing into action. It's the Super Bowl on steroids. And inside, Ramadan, here there's a breaking of fast in communal situations. And then in addition to the 5 pillars, there are the 5 questions on Judgment Day. We're familiar with Judgment Day. That's part of our Bible as well, part of the Christian Bible. I won't say our Bible. And how you live your life on earth, what you did when you were young, how did you get your money, how did you spend your money, what did you do with the things you knew, this is just a repeat of those 5 questions for the days of the day of judgment. Other core beliefs of Islam: no saints. There are no saints in, strictly speaking, in Islam. Now, yeah, you can, some sects do have saints. So there are Sufi saints, in fact, but that's not a central part of Islam. They have the detailed laws in Sharia. They, like Christianity, like Buddhism, equality was a big universal value that they promoted, as opposed to previous religions before you got the redemptive religions. Communal values, as you can see from above, the people of the book, but eventually the Hindus were included as people of the book when they started proselytizing on the Indian subcontinent. So that was a very loose definition by the people that enacted that. As I said earlier, the Jews were allies of Muhammad, and when he got kicked out of Mecca in the early days, he retreated to Medina, and he said, I'm interested in doing the monotheistic thing you guys have got. And so they allied with him. and certainly gave him sanctuary, but also joined him on the battlefield. This is portrays Muhammad's death. They can't show the face. He's said to have rode his horse before he died as well. So this is on his horse after he died, but he rode his horse at one point to Jerusalem in a dream. So is Islam a militant religion, or is it, can it be, and it can be more on the soft side in the direction of Sufi mysticism? Rumi was Persian, and he had to retreat from the Mongols, immigrating all this way on foot over to Konya, where he set up the Rumi sort of mystique, a Sufi center, and it attracted people from Ottomans from Istanbul as well. So they were there was a pilgrimage from Istanbul to Konya, the place of Rumi. So the two extremes. So we're going back now to the Pashtuns. We left them just as they were about to hear about Muhammad. Let's just look at a review of the land in 600, before Islam burst onto the scene from Mecca here. You look at all of what Afghanistan was, and you look at this map, and there's a number 25 in here. They don't even have room to put it. Here's 25. So this is the familiar mountains, the Hindu Kush that we've looked at. Here is Bamiyan is number 25, Bamiyan. And we know that Bamiyan was on the Silk Road, that's why they built the Bamiyan Buddhas chiseled out of the side of a cliff. Those two gigantic Buddhas that the Taliban blew up because they were idols, and violated one of the 5 pillars of Islam. So the big guy in town was the Persian Sassanid dynasty at that time. And so Afghanistan didn't exist and was just kind of a backwater. We read a lot about Bactria and talked about it. Iko asked if there were any current Bactrians, and they're all divided between 3 nations, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. We saw it on many maps, Bactria. Here's Gandhara. This is an interesting location. We've heard, and I think we saw earlier, the Gandhara Buddha. So that was part of the influence of the Kushans, introducing Buddha to this area. And this is the furthest that Alexander reached, Gandhara. So the first 23 years after his death, I think this map's going to show that Islam got to Afghanistan pretty darn quick. We remember that there was a 300-year waiting period for Confucius to have a political impact. Ditto for Buddhism in India. And of course, the Romans adopted Christianity 300 years after Christ. But there was no waiting period for Islam. Watch how it spreads. Bottom right-hand corner, you can see the dates of how quickly it's spreading. And it's not peaceful. There are a lot of warrior types, soldiers that are in it for the booty. And now it reaches Afghanistan, the western part, and then the central part by six. What's that? Question? I'll let you this run through a second time, and then we'll move on. But it's just really impressive. And Afghanistan is the recipient. Their legendary leader Qais may not have been responsible for this. All right. So it wasn't in the beginning a holy war. They didn't want to convert people. Initially, it was for booty. They didn't want to have to share their booty. They would have to share their booty if the locals converted to Islam. The other incentive to keep to not proselytize is they could tax non-Muslims higher. And the other evidence, they were more than willing to ally with the Copts against Byzantium. The Copts were the Christians in Egypt. So if there had been a strict holy war, they wouldn't have allied with the Egyptian Christians. So by 750, our target area here is Afghanistan. We can see, according to this map, by 632, they had Herat, a familiar name to us in Afghanistan. And by 750, certainly they had Kabul and the Khyber Pass, and Baluchistan below, Samarkand above. And I want you to just take special notice. We're going to talk about the Caspian Sea and Islam. It's a little bit of a complicated story, but it's important because it impacts Afghanistan. So move on to 800. We see that there's some Turks lurking. These are the Altaic people. So far, we've been talking pretty much about Indo-European people that speak Indo-European languages. And we see the Arab Caliphate going all the way over here and beyond anything that Alexander conquered. So beyond the Indus. And I'm just going to peek ahead, jump ahead, just to give you a picture of where we're going. By 1250, you've got trade, big time. So there's the Islamic religion promotes trust and credit. What is credit? It's trust. And a lot of this was done by Sufi missionaries, if you will. And the Sufi missionaries made it all the way to Indonesia. And by this map, you'll see that they would have had to have confronted Buddhism in many countries. And famously, they converted parts of Indonesia that were Buddhist. And in the north, they're bumping up against the Altaic Turks. I'm just jumping ahead so you see there's going to be one development coming out of the Caspian Sea, and that's Shia. Now, Shiism existed from the very beginning because there was a succession question with Muhammad. Should it go to a council that would choose a leader, or should it go to be inherited? And of course, the Shia thought it should be inherited and given to his relative Ali. But I include this for Afghanistan because you're going to see right in the middle of Afghanistan. Barb, you need to mute. Sorry. That's okay. You see right in the middle of Afghanistan, the Shia island, and we'll talk about that. That's the Hazara. But how did the Hazara get there? We'll discuss. So back to the Pashtuns. I've given you the setup, the maps, the geography, and let's see what the Pashtuns do over the next 600 years, the expanse of history that I just outlined. So the legend starts with Qais Khan traveling and meeting Muhammad, getting a new name. Abdur Rashid even. And you can poo-poo this. How could the Pashtuns believe anything so far-fetched? Well, I started asking myself that, and I said, wait a minute. My friends, the Celts, also believe some pretty astounding stuff. And so in this book on with maybe a bloated title, we could argue about that and discuss it. That'd take a whole hour. But I learned that the Celt legends and mythology are no less fantastical, and maybe more fantastical. It puts Celts on ships. They come after the flood because they're related to Noah. So here's the family tree that somehow gets you to a Scot. And Scots an early name for all Celts. Going all the way back to Noah, but also some time spent in the Holy Land in Egypt on the way. And it's all in the book. It wasn't just listening to a local bard, it was actually in the book, right? Sort of like being on the internet now. These books were chronicles written by medieval monks indulging in fantasy. And so some of the mythical, legendary thinking took place among the Pashtuns too. So a very human thing to do in early and medieval times. All this myth making is examined in detail in a very good book. If you're interested in the Pashtun, this is your go-to book. It's written by Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, and I find it very good if you want the full details. And I'll be quoting him off and on, particularly when we're dealing with legends that are hard to believe. So here's what Sadiq says about our friend Qais Khan. He's legendary. This is what some people believe, and he thinks they believe that and promoted that idea to bring harmony between all the different ethnic identities and religions. And by ethnic identities, that includes tribes and Pashtun sub-tribes in particular. He puts a corrective on this rather than Qais coming back and spreading Islam throughout Afghanistan. It spread over through Afghanistan over a period of time. And we looked at that and it went all the way up to 750. So Qais didn't live that long. And then where some of the terminology come from. Pashtun can also be Pushtun. And it's the word is related to a specific area in Ghori, where Qais is first settled. Where is that? Well, let's just take a look at a map to find out where Ghori is. It's not exactly on this map, but I want to just put this up. It's a really good geographical map, and what we're looking at the Hindu Kush, and this is the current nation of Afghanistan, varied places. Here's Bamiyan. We talked about that before. Here's Kabul. Here's Jalalabad. I'll have a few things to say about that later. Herat.
But John, before you leave this wonderful map, could you point out where the Khyber Pass is, please?
Yeah, so Khyber Pass, go to Jalalabad and down through here.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Ghor is going to be right in the middle here. It's hard to imagine that you could have a major city, but or a society, but here it is. Here was the province of Ghor. And one day they would launch and have influence and have a dynasty. Here's Bamiyan. Here's Kabul. This is the province where Jalalabad and the Khyber Pass is. And this is their sultanate, if you will. I misspoke. Their sultanate existed at the time of the Seljuk Turks, but we'll get to that in a second. Kabul, Herat, but the Caspian Sea. So a late arrival of Islam there, Baku at the end of the Caspian Sea. And I'll be talking about Baku in a minute. This is really fantastical that Qais first settled in Patna after he left Ghori. That's interesting. And where's Patna? All the way the heck over here. So clearly impossible. Here is Patna on the Ganges. This is an example of retrofitted history. So something happens and you go back and make up a legend of what must have preceded it. There was a Pashtun king, if you will, Sher Shah Suri, who was working actually for the Mughals. So I'm really jumping ahead of the story, but it relates to Qais and the claims made about Qais Shah. And he was the ruler in Patna in 500 years ago. And he, obviously Qais was 1,500 years ago, so off by 1,000 years almost. And Sher Shah was a very wise ruler, but he was Pashtun, and he had influence, and the Pashtuns had influence all the way over to the eastern part of the Ganges. And so obviously he is a legend. They call him the Lion King, and a very able administrator, building of infrastructure, managed the economy and trade very well, and currency. This was the time gunpowder was coming in 1545, and he died in an unfortunate or early explosion as they were experimenting with how to use this new weapon. He built a fort and a mosque that is quite beautiful and reminiscent of some other Mughal structures that like the Taj Mahal that Aiko has visited. So this is 1540, not the time of Qais. So retrofitted history. All things cannot last, and Akbar finally said, okay, Sher Shah had been a kind of a deputy, if you will. They delegated, and Akbar said enough. And we'll revisit this in the appropriate sequence. But I had to include that to address this fantastical claim that Patna was the early part of Pashtun history, and it was the later part of Pashtun history, but not off by premature by 1,000 years. Now, there are other names for Pashtuns. And I want to just clear that up, because if you're reading along, you get confused. But there are 4 terms that can refer to the ethnic group, now most commonly known as the Pashtuns. So Pathan, where did that come from? So in the Patna language, which Sher Shah, he conquered Patna. In that language, Patan means to root out, to annihilate. So originally it was an epithet, and they were called the Pathans because they came to annihilate us people in Patna. And those original people were expelled. It became probably a heavily Pashtun city, at least with influence and power. And so this was about the time Pashto became written. So the term Pathan was adopted into the Pashto language, not as an epithet at all, but around the time of Sher Shah. I know I'm jumping around a bit, but to understand the vocabulary, you kind of have to. So Afghan was a word that originated about that time as well. And every time you see the word the Raj, that just means king or ruler. And I think some of us get confused because we think of the British Raj. Well, the British Raj was just the one in a series of rulers or kings, Rajas. And Pathan was, like I just said, a corruption. And it was in Sher Shah's time, the term Afghan and Pathan became more in currency because of his power and influence. So here are the four terms that can be synonymous. Now, there's going to be confusion when we get to the age of the nation. Afghanistan is not just Pashtun, but Afghan, a person, is synonymous with all these others, but Pashtun being the term we use most now. So the Kais passed away, and he left three sons. And this is confusing too, and I only introduce it because to tell you that we're not going to go deep into Pashtun tribal history. The sub-tribes and the clans it'll make your head spin. I'm just going to give you the bare minimum. This is Sadiq again, talking about how and where some of these legends got written. In particular, the genealogies that describe all the tribes. They're fantastical and retrofitted history as well. And it was done in the 17th century Mughal courts by Pashtun advisors, and particularly the court scribe, this Pashtun. And the British eventually got their hands on them. And some of the legends and genealogies got perpetuated that way. So Kais actually, he had three legitimate sons and one adopted son. So they were actually four branches. I'm just going to give you an example of one branch, the Bitani branch. And the example I'm going to give, and you're going to have to, this is going to be the stand-in for all the hundreds of sub-tribes within the Pashtun community. But I'm going to just mention the Ghilzais. And even today, they're one of the largest nomadic populations in the world, and they had a prominent member who made his mark in history. And then it gets confusing. Here's another way of breaking down the tribes into these categories, which is very different, and we're not going to get into it. But this is an example of a Katak that would be from the second category, and a famous Katak. Enough. I think I've made my point. It's too confusing, and we're trying to look at the forest, and there's some trees we're just not going to get into. So the again, Sadiq is my go-to guy, very well reviewed. This is a photo from the cover of his book. Sadiq is Pashtun. He is Pashtun and an academic. So this is what he says about this tribal maze. The world's largest tribally organized society, I guess, outpacing the Kurds. And what unites them? Only the language. And I've emphasized over and over again that I don't think it's the genes. It's they get too mixed up. It's the language, and the language reflects a culture. And Pashto is an Indo-European language. Here's Bactria again. This is probably where the spoken Pashto originated, related to the Greeks, and also an Indo-European language, written down 500 years ago. And here you see Pashtun, Pushtun used interchangeably. And in addition to the language, there's a tribal code, so that the language unifies people, but then also there's the tribal code. And this is what manages to keep all the various sub-tribes at least on the same page. Now they interpret it differently, but Pashtunwali. And another example is the egalitarianism, which is part of Islam, as we just saw. And the leadership is not inherited. It is mostly based on merit. And how do you elect on the basis of merit? You call a jirga. We remember in the early days of Afghanistan, they had this big thing called a Loya jirga to launch the Afghani government, and Karzai came out of that. And my reading of what's been going on, I'll just, spoiler alert, I think Karzai was a more positive fellow than we thought at the time. But we can debate that. And so what is Pashtunwali? Here are the major traits. Some of these will be familiar. There's certainly the hospitality. We see that hospitality is often a feature of early nomads, that those people that were hospitable tended to survive. You can offer refuge. Examples abound of unimaginable offering of refuge to somebody on the run. A woman offers the killer of her son refuge because he invoked Nanawati. That's in this century, the example. This is the one that just drives the violence, which is, we say, is that at the bottom of civilization, what we're trying to quelch with civilization. But here is a concept within their civil code, or their tribal code, I should say. All things are allowable if it's a revenge.
So how do you resolve Nanawati with Badal? They seem completely contradictory.
Yeah, no, in the example I gave would,
Yeah.
but it was a woman who offered it. It's up to the men to declare a bottle, I suppose. I don't know. Full of complexity and contradictions, but I would suspect that the woman would give the hospitality, and the men didn't know about it. But I read this interestingly in a contemporary report on Pashtunwali in The Economist, this example. I'll see if I can dig it out and send it around and give you more detail on that one episode. So the rest of this is pretty unremarkable, except the last one. So the defense of one's women. And that's where the burqa comes from. You got to defend your women, and by God, let's act preemptively. Let's prevent any flirtation whatsoever. So this is not Sharia. This is not Islam. This is Pashtunwali. And often Pashtunwali and Sharia will be at opposite ends, opposed to each other, adding to the complexity. This is just another depiction of Pashtunwali, all the same elements. Again, all the same elements, a little bit more able to read. The jirga is certainly one, the loya jirga, the arbitration, the election of a new leader. And here's badal, revenge. And if you have any self-respect, you have the right to call a badal, to spare your name, your honor, and show your Torah, your bravery. So a lot of this is masculine, right? A lot of this is masculine stuff. So this is the model I'm starting to work with, and in my mind, I'm toying with it. I'll just give you a peek of at least how I started with it, to try to reconcile all the influences that I'm seeing on the Pashtuns. So start with the tribal customs, the Pashtunwali. Now add Islam, as Qais visits and talks to Muhammad firsthand. And we're not there yet, but pretty soon we're going to see the role of nationalism. Hey, all you tribes, let's get together in something bigger and defend our borders against these other nations that have formed that keep coming in. And then you add a layer, which I've done here, outsiders. Well, the most current example is America, but before America, there was Britain and there was the Soviet Union. And so that actually perversely enhances the role of nationalism as a motivation. And an insight, I think, that has led finally to international policy, foreign policy gurus saying, you know what, just us being there is causing a lot of problems. And so this is one thing. Tribal custom, you get into building a nation, and now you've got to deal with Tajiks, who are also part of, and we've seen conflict with the perennial challenger to the presidency, Abdullah, who is a physician. He's a Tajik, and he thinks he wins all the time, and the Pashtuns always pull it out somehow. But this last time they offered him a co-presidency almost. And that was part of the regime that just fell. And then with Islam, we're going to get Shia, but we're also going to get international Islam, as there's an international interest in fighting the Soviet Union. And where is that from? Saudi Arabia. So bin Laden comes in with his variation of Islam and starts work in this corner of the triangle. The Taliban has international pretensions as well. So it really gets complicated, particularly when the outsiders have international jihad called against them, as was called and motivated the Mujahideen and what's motivated the Taliban. All right, now with that background and keeping the triangle in mind, let's look at Sadiq's key insight and the role of Pakistan. Pakistan's motive is to support the international jihad that comes in to Afghanistan. Why would he do that? He would do that to undermine Afghan nationalism. And why would Afghan nationalism be opposed by Pakistani? Because the Afghanistan nation claims the Pashtun territory that's currently part of Pakistan. And so Pakistan lives in fear of any kind of unity among Pashtuns, which make up 20% of their population. Pashtuns make up 50% of Afghanistan's population. So they have a double-barreled fear, and Pakistan does, the two corners of the triangle. The nationalism that'll grab their borders, and the strengthening of the Pashtun tribal culture. So they'll support international jihadists to come in to thwart Afghanistan nationalism and any Pashtun desires for unification. So that's my a brief introduction to the model I'm working on, but Pakistan is another one of those outsiders. Okay, so Pashtun, introducing the idea of the tribal code led me onto a tangent, but I wanted to carry that tribal code while it was introduced to you and was fresh into your mind. I wanted to carry that forward and show you how it's part of the complex puzzle that's always been Afghanistan. Now we're going back to history. So Islam has been established in Afghanistan. The Persians come sneaking in, and they establish hegemony in most of Afghanistan. This is not an important empire. I only introduce it because I don't want you to confuse it with the Safavid dynasty. So the Safavid dynasty. So the difference between Vid and Rid, the Safavid dynasty was a minor Sunni Persian dynasty that ruled over parts of Afghanistan. And the city from which they ruled is actually in Afghanistan, but it's Persian. And that lasted 150 years. And it's the first of many indigenous Persian Islamic dynasties. And there's a big one, the Safavid, that I'll get to later. So remember the Ghorids? We talked about this is where Kais went to when he came back from Arabia after meeting with Muhammad. Well, this is the Sultanate that they eventually created. And we see now the first inkling of an Altaic invasion, the Seljuk Turks. They've been lurking up here, and they finally made their move around this time, and they adopt Islam. But the big Altaic invasion, the huge one that has more lingering effects, is reflected in the faces of the Hazara women. and that's the Mongols. And the Mongols completely reshuffle and reset everything in Afghanistan. And this is how that's dealt with in the more Pashtun-centric history that I've been sharing with you. The brutal murdering and raping of Genghis Khan and his men created and influenced certainly the appearance of many Hazara, Uzbek, and Tajik peoples. And the Pashtuns have had to absorb Hazaras into their territory. And what was the Hazara response? Well, we don't feel welcome here. I think we'll be Shia. And whether they were looking for help from Iran at any point in time, I don't know. But this is probably the largest ethnic tension the Pashtuns have, maybe second to only to the Tajiks. So Genghis Khan, an Altaic invasion, has lasting effects, and the Mongols set up a Khanate. So a Khanate can be Islamic, but these certainly weren't. These were the Mongolian pantheon religions. And I think this is, and of course, it wasn't just Afghanistan they took over China. They established a dynasty in China. We're focused on the Kagatai Khanate, and there's going to be one family line that comes out of the Kagatai Khanate that's going to play a big role in the next chapter when we see how the offshoot of the Mongols takes over northern India. But this is a good place to stop. I'll just review and stop by saying now we're into Altaic times. The different people that come from the steppes, they don't speak Indo-European. The language is so different that you're going to get more differences and more mistrust, a time of chaos. We already saw the Seljuks had come in and set up shop. The Ottomans are going to be coming in later. Probably the most influential Altaic invasion of the Ottomans. And we're still seeing that, right, in Turkey today. We've talked earlier about Japan. I won't go over that again, but the Turkic and Mongolian people are linked at least very distantly by language, and very different than the Indo-European. This was the core area for the development of the Indo-European language, and it spread to all this green area, which is most of India. The very southern tip is still the original Dravidian, but all the way up to the northern part of the world, very influential Indo-European languages. And here are the most prominent family members of the Indo-European languages. So this is Afghanistan is the place where, one of the places where Indo-European civilizations meet Altaic civilizations. And we're going to see over and over again that Afghanistan is on the border between different civilizations and different ways of thinking. And that influences what just went down in the last month. So this is a good place to stop. Tamerlane is our next Altaic invader, but we'll return to him later. And I will entertain any questions.
Wow, that's not a question, that's a comment. Wow.
Yeah.
Another, yeah, that was heroic, John.
Well, I learned so much. There's so much to learn, and to understand this is to I'm beginning to understand maybe the complex. I don't understand any grand principles, but I'm beginning to understand at least why there are no grand principles. The complexity of the situation.
Yeah, it's really, it's quite interesting. Given the kind of the chaos of the geography, the chaos I'm using very benignly, like the geography of the region is so dramatic, and the influences and all the different civilizing or non-civilizing forces in that area. It's pretty stunning.
Yeah, yeah. That Crossroads is the key concept.
Yes.
They're north-south between the Indian subcontinent civilization and the nomads on the Altaic nomads on the grasslands. The east-west, the Silk Road between China all the way to the Mediterranean, Alexander the Great. I don't know if anybody saw the movie The Man Who Would Be King.
No, it's a familiar title, but no.
It's a Rudyard Kipling story.
I didn't know it's Rudyard. Yeah, I saw it a long time ago, though. I have to watch it again now. You're inspiring me.
Well, I won't give it away. I'll just say that it's Sean Connery and Michael Caine.
Oh
and,
my!
Yeah, really good acting.
And the MacGuffin in the story, the thing that the whole twist of the story relates to something I just said in the last 2 minutes.
Oh geez, that's kind of cliffhanger there.
Yeah.
So if I'm understanding, I'm going to have to watch this like 2 or 3 more times. But so the Pashtun are really not any single ethnic group. They're a belief system then.
And a language group. So
Yeah.
The writing down of the Pashto language 500 years ago was a big step forward. Up until then, the spoken language was what united them, and they're very, very fragmented. I can't begin to tell you how fragmented they are. So that's a maze, and that's part of the complexity.
So they have.
John.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I just have one question. The Muslim religion, does it have branches like the Christianity? You know, we have Catholicism, Protestantism, and Baptists, and, you know, we have all these divisions. I mean, is it all one religion then, or?
No. So you've got the Sunni and the Shia, and then within each there are branches, and there are 3 major branches of the Sunni, and the kind of Sunni that the Pashtuns eventually adopted was the Hanafi branch of Sunni, as opposed to the other 2 branches. I think there are subtle differences. It was complicated enough. I didn't dive into the different branches of Sunni, But I did mention the Sufi, and they're still alive in various pockets of places. And there have been any number of attempts to come up with a syncretic religion that unifies all the major branches. And they've always included something like Sufi, the gentle, more mystical side of Islam. And as I said, we have a Sufi temple right here in Walnut Creek.
Thank you.
So, two questions. Does Pashtunwali have any semblance to Wahhabism? You know, that's super strict. So they don't have any associations with each other.
No, I'd say Wahhabi is part of the outsider influence that came in. I don't think bin Laden was the first Wahhabiist to start mucking around in Afghanistan. I think there was another minor Wahhabist to come in, but certainly bin Laden was the Wahhabist that mixed the pot and created a huge international global problem. And I'm hearing some people say if what he had in mind was to bring down another civilization like the Mujahideen, of which he was a part in the 1980s, and to whom we gave money as a foreign policy, another movie, Charlie Wilson's War, the story of how we got into aiding the Mujahideen and people like bin Laden. That introduction of outside influence that's at one corner of my triangle is as I add on layers to the triangle, is going to get bigger and bigger. And the Wahhabism is not mainstream Hanafi at all. And as I said earlier, the Pashtunwali conflicts with tenets of Islam. So when you get into revenge and that kind of stuff, that's not Sharia. And so there have been conflicts between Pashtunwali and the Islamists, particularly the Wahhabis. So you get the Taliban executing tribal leaders, executing them in Waziristan. So it's not just below the surface. It's very much often above the surface. So no, Pashtunwali is separate.
And then the other question is, Qais Khan, you mentioned that he was supposed to have gone to Patna. Patna's way the heck over to the east.
That's why it didn't make any sense.
Yeah, so that's a mythology.
That's a mythology. So what happened is Pashtuns, Sher Shah in particular, cozied up to the Mughals.
Yeah, because they'd have to go through the Mughal territory to get to Patna, and the Mughals were very strong.
And we'll be talking a lot more about the Mughals. I told that story as a flash forward, so we didn't have the background at the time that I was dealing with Qais and the legend, but to explain that one slide that mentions Patna, I was forced to do this tangent. I didn't want to do a tangent, but I was forced. I was forced into it. And that what happened is Sher Shah, as a Pashtun favored advisor in the Mughal court, is given control over Patna, and he does a really good job doing all the stuff that I talked about. And at the time, there was probably some scribe in the court there were scribes in every court. So I talked about the scribes in the Mughal court. So there were scribes in Sher Shah's court who, like the Irish monks making up stories about the old Celts, started making up stories about how the Pashtuns got to Patna. And so you get these stories accepted to the point that words and concepts become part of the Pashtun language. It had only been spoken until 500 years ago. And once they got scribes in a court starting to write some of the myths down, it was really easy to fantasize, well, what Pashtuns are powerful now, they've always been here.
So
Yeah.
what is the dates for Qais Khan?
Around 1500.
Oh.
Okay, so that's really early Mughal then.
Yeah, early Mughals, for sure. But early Pashtuns as well. In terms of Pashtun political influence, early for that too.
So, John, I have a question about the Mujahideen, because isn't that just that's not an ethnic group or it's just anybody, it's a kind of like being a Green Beret, you can just join from any.
It's a jihad.
It's the international jihad. So you get outsiders coming in with their own interests in Afghanistan. And so the Soviets arguably started the Wahhabis in Saudi Arabia say, okay, we'll see the communists and we'll raise them one, and they send bin Laden. And then now you've got a second international entity there. And then, as if that's not enough, they'll say, well, Charlie Wilson, a congressman from Texas, says, well, if Islam is going to fight the commies, I think we should help. We should help our fellow Abrahamic co-religionists to fight the commies. And so we give the Mujahideen international support. And so now there's three outsiders mucking around in poor Afghanistan. So we'll tell the Taliban evolution later.
So how does this relate to the Kurdish warriors because there were Kurds also?
Yeah. Yeah, but fortunately, there's no Kurdish layer to this story. All the Kurdish complexity is in Syria and Turkey and Iraq.
Right.
And then, of course, the Kurdish had their own famous warrior who captured Richard the Lionhearted, Saladin. He was Kurdish.
Right. This is so complicated.
It's so complicated. As long as you understand that it's complicated and can deal with oversimplifications, that's a place to start. I don't know if I'll get beyond that, describing the complexity, but Sadiq is very good with that. And I'll just tip you off. I just listened to a podcast with Sadiq, and he introduced a new complexity, which is young people on social media. young Pashtuns on
Oh,
Yes,
young Pashtuns on social media have started a peace organization.
yes.
A
oh,
peace or-
fantastic.
and it
Can-
would be fantastic, except how are the Pakistanis responding? The
Oh.
same way they've always responded to any kind of Pashtun
Yeah.
unity. They see it as a threat.
Absolutely. Well, it is to them,
Yes.
to their interests, right? So
Yeah.
there's, I'm trying, oh yeah, Al Jazeera has a very interesting
Oh.
long piece about Afghanistan and how everybody's getting it wrong. And it has a bit about the peace movement and anyway, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, look in Al Jazeera.
Yeah, well, we'll build up to that. I hope to include that organically in the history as we're only up to. I gave us a peek to 1500, but we still got some business in the 13 and 1400s to deal
Holy
with.
shit.
So, John, can you send the, or can you tell me what the podcast, the Sadiq podcast is? Because,
Yeah, sure. I'll send it to you.
great, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay,
All
now I
right.
need to go to bed. That was a lot. I'm gonna start tomorrow right now. Bye.
There you go.
All right.
Thank
Bye.
you so
Thank
much,
you.
John. Fabulous.
Okay.
Yes,
I'll
fabulous.
sign off, and I'll see you
Thank you.
next Tuesday.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
Tuesday at noon.
At
Tuesday-
12.
Yeah, Tuesday at noon.
Tuesday
Right.
at noon.
Hey,
Tuesday at
John.
noon.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
should I go offline to ask you a question about?
I'll
specificity?
stop recording.
Oh, good.